Hi everyone, welcome to episode 8 of The Voice of Gen Z. I'm Saba, I work on marketing at Climbs, and this episode's a little different because I'll be hosting for the first time. Very excited to be here and chat to Sabareesh of World Resources Institute. Thanks so much for being here, Sabareesh.
Same here, Saba, thanks.
To kick us off, I'll give a little bit of an introduction about myself since this is my first time on the podcast. So I had a slightly unconventional entrance into the climate tech space. I studied political science and anthropology at the University of Edinburgh and became interested in the climate space while there. But I had initially opted to go down the think tank policy research route. In fact, I was considering applying to WRI at the time that I met Ani and Sid. And I found what they were working on super interesting, so decided to give it a shot. That was back in July 2021. I have been at Climbs for over a year now. I was the fifth person to join back then. When I joined, it was still just a project, so it's actually been amazing to see it grow over the last year. And I've worked on a million different things while being at Climbs. I've been on product, I've been on user research, I've been on design, now marketing. So it's been an incredibly enriching experience for me. I know people say 1 year at a startup is like 4 years at any other job, and I genuinely believe that after the last year. So yeah, that's me. Please give a short introduction about yourself and about WRI, what you do.
Absolutely, thanks. So by training and background, I'm an architect and an urban planner. And for me, venturing into the climate space has been something long due, I guess. I was practicing architecture. I was with an architect called Suhasini Iyer in Oroville, training on alternative materials before. Then I did my master's in urban and regional planning and got very interested in the idea of cities and how building resilience is the matter of the hour. So I picked up a global consulting organization called Athena Infonomics. It basically works on using and leveraging data science as a medium of supporting multiple stakeholders on prioritizing investment decisions. So that sort of an opportunity gave me an understanding about the entire ecosystem and who are the players in this particular space, especially in the development space. And I really wanted to anchor and specialize in climate adaptation, to be specific. And that's how I landed up in WRI. WRI, as you know, is an international research organization which focuses on multiple themes. And I represent the climate resilience practice. We are headquartered in DC and have offices in Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore. A large part of our work focuses on supporting subnational entities in creating their own climate action pathways. And our focus area mostly is on what we call as locally led adaptation and mainstreaming resilience in development action plans. So I've been with WRI for almost a year right now, and we work with the states of Tamil Nadu, Madhya Pradesh, and Sikkim at least in the grassroots level, and have helped the states to come out with their own climate action plans. For example, in Tamil Nadu, we're working with a couple of districts in rolling out the district climate action plans, and also with the state in a big way in supporting their state action plan on climate change.
Very cool.
So that's where it is.
I'm very interested that you started at Oroville. What made you go there?
Well, I think when you study architecture, you sometimes put into a very elitist praise. You start thinking about design in a very contemporary trend. I didn't want to sort of go into those lenses, and since I was studying in Chennai, I did have a chance to visit Oroville once in one of our trips back. And I was very interested in the idea of looking at rammed earth as a medium of construction, which has huge benefits. And also the aesthetic sense to it is really good. So
does it influence a lot of the stuff you implement now? What you learned at Oroville?
It does. It does, but ultimately it's what clients actually choose at the end of the day.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I can call it rammed earth. For them, it's just mud. So the association of what it is something that we've been trying to propagate. But yeah, it's what it is.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I'm definitely going to ask you more about climate resilience and all the work that you do a little later on. But before we dive into that, just want to set some context. So Gen C, the voice of Gen Z, is what we at Climbs call Generation Climate, which we describe as an ecosystem of various stakeholders like individuals, brands, organizations like yours that care and act for the climate. And of course, WRI is Gen Z and the work that it does, but even more so now because thanks to people like you, they have gone the extra mile and hosted their first carbon neutral workshop in Madhya Pradesh just a couple of weeks ago. So could you tell us a little more about the workshop and how you came across Climbs and made the decision to include us?
Quite interesting. I think it is a part of a conversation that goes about a couple of years from now, I guess. I met Annie. We were part of the same team in an Unleash hackathon. We pitched a project together, and
cool.
From there, I still remember some of our conversations on the same route. We couldn't do that during that time because that was on the SDGs, and we were working on SDG 11, not on the 13. But I remember making some of these conversations, and he was talking about Sustainability Mafia and other sort of initiatives that he was sort of running. So when at WRI, one of the critical things that we do is to basically support local governments, and the bread and butter of it also starts with organizing workshops. Right? So we host about, let's say, close to 100 or 150 odd workshops every year. And that's because we do a lot of capacity building to local governments.
Yeah.
Climate resilience, I think, is a topic of conversation that is very difficult for officials to really understand at the first go, because it's cross-sectoral. And when you talk about work, it's mostly done from a very siloized space. So, for example, if somebody is in the municipal authority, they know what their work is, but it's very difficult for them to understand what happens in the agriculture space or somewhere else. So I think one of these discussions that actually sprung up was that when we are able to host such workshops, we thought it would be a very nice way to demonstrate what we try to mean or what we want to talk about neutralization. Right?
Yeah.
And the good thing about Climbs, it's not that carbon offset is a new thing. Carbon offsets are something that's happening all across the world, and there are multiple registries and other things that's also available. But what I liked about Climbs is that it gives you a very personalized way of looking at and choosing which projects do you want to really contribute to. And it has gamified the whole experience, which is it's very nice to actually try it out in the first go as well. So this idea, somehow it materialized. We've been talking about it for a long time. And WRI has its own sustainability agenda as well in terms of the initiatives it does. We have our own carbon tracker. We also have our own inventories, especially in terms of the travels that we make, in terms of the sustainable purchasing, which is such a... So there are a lot of policy level introductions that we make. And incidentally, this is something that we had an opportunity to try it out, and which is also set well. I mean, you'll be very happy to know a lot of these guys at the district level.
Yeah.
They were able to choose the fact that they got their own certificates, made them post them in their own social medias. This was probably the first time that they ever interacted in such a manner.
That's amazing to hear. Yeah.
And there was a whole lot of official gatherings. So we had about 80 people coming from multiple departments: agriculture, forestry, waste management, and so on. And everybody wanted to contribute to something that was personal to them. So if it was for waste management, they wanted to contribute to a project which had waste management, and so on. So in that way, I think it led us to see how these interactions could mean more, rather than just talking about this in per se.
You described that so perfectly, the way you said that it's a way to demonstrate what you're trying to explain to someone, which is how I often talk about the events product to other people, because I kind of imagine it like a microcosm of climate action just happening there on the spot. So ideally, in an ideal world, you would have multiple people making collective decisions together and having real climate impact collectively. And I think every carbon neutral event that we have is a small way to do that, to get the ball rolling. And maybe 5 people in a group of 80, or maybe 10 people in a group of 80, learn something from that experience and then take that forward, which is what would be ideal. And from what you're telling me, I think that happened a little bit, which is great for us to hear. That's exactly actually how the events product came to be. I can give a little bit of a history of it, and I'm biased towards the events product. We have multiple now, even at Climbs. We have a carbon counter, a carbon label, API checkout, everything. But one of my personal favorites is the events product, because I feel like I was there when it came to be, which happened in July of last year, when Ani and I went to give a talk at the Masters Union Business School. To these students, we were supposed to talk to them about how climate goals can be achieved through business, and how it's important to innovate and start up in the climate space so that we can achieve our climate goals. And Ani and I were sitting and brainstorming about the best way to educate these students about what Climbs was about. We always talk about show, don't tell at Climbs. So how can we physically recreate the experience to make it more interesting? So we printed out Climbs stickers to represent the Climbs physically, and then handed them out to the students and had different bowls for each project and asked them to physically come and choose which project they wanted to support. And they loved it. And it's always great asking people why they chose a project. Like you said, it's something personal to them. Many people say that they choose a project because it was located in a state that they grew up in, or a state that they live in. So they want to see a relatable personal impact through what they're doing. And through these interactions, we then decided to turn it into a product that we could use for many events. And we've actually applied it to all kinds of different situations. I mean, we've had carbon neutral weddings, conferences, workshops, even birthday parties. My own birthday party was carbon neutral. And I found that every time it's always been such an exciting talking point for whoever's experienced it. And like you said, it's almost a way to discover and nurture more Gen Z actors, people who care about climate. I saw also that you posted about the event, and in that you mentioned that it helped you convert climate intent into climate action. And I think that's such an important point, because it's at the core of what we do at Climbs and everything that we build, not just in the events product, but in the company itself. So would love to hear from you how WRI works to bridge this gap, because I think in the climate space, it's a very common issue across the board. Yeah.
So I think just like how you mentioned, we love the idea of piloting and demonstrating, even if the outcomes are not very positive to our end. But the fact that we get to try something out to see whether the intended benefits of certain actions are really materialized. So some of the initiatives, even for this particular workshop for that matter, we know that we could neutralize the efforts that are taken to this workshop. That didn't stop us from not thinking about what could be done previously, right? For example, when we went about deciding the goodie bags, or for that matter, the transportation that was necessary to bring or mobilize people, right? We ensured that there was a carpooling that was actually done. Then, for example, we said no plastics to be utilized during the venue. And in terms of the food arrangements that were made, generally workshops, when they become a very big affair on their own, right?
Yeah.
So the intent of the workshop was to talk about climate proofing of the district of Narmadapuram in MP. So in the true spirit and the intent of that particular workshop, we went about each of these decisions that ensures that we could avoid some of the GHG emissions from our side itself when you're considering how do you organize a workshop. Of course, there are some things which you can, that's the unavoidable. GHG is something that you could really account for. So choosing the venue, even the venue decision was also done in such a way that people had to, in a way, they could walk to the place, or it was nearer to the secretariat. So 50% of your crowd could walk directly inside. And the rest of them could carpool and come to the place. And because it was set up in a December morning, the need for air conditioning was completely avoided. So there are multiple ways that we could really account for in this particular workshop, to be specific. But apart from this, I think when you talk about the work that we do in the space, to be very specific about some examples, we work with the government of Tamil Nadu in rolling out their adaptation strategies. Since mangroves are considered to be an excellent nature-based solution that acts as a physical barrier, and at the same time has a higher sequestration potential as well. So we're coming up with multiple climate finance schemes. I don't know if you know about payment for ecosystem services, where you work with the local communities to basically raise and ensure that the resources of the mangrove resources which are actually out there are still sustained. At the same time, the community also benefits as a result out of it. So we pilot a lot of these different initiatives. Is coming up with something called Climate Smart Agriculture and Climate Smart Villages program, piloting 10 different districts in different agroclimatic conditions on interventions like rainwater harvesting, intercrop breeding, and so on. So yeah, I think it's mostly to do with piloting of these interventions and seeing what you could get a result out of it. And the scale up is obviously, we leave it to the governments to take it up.
But that's amazing to hear across the board how you've considered almost every aspect within the workshop, and then of course also in the work you're doing. And it's quite similar to how Climbs functions as well. Ani and Sid will always say, experiment, put it out there, put it out there, put it out there. And the reason that we've managed to find such interesting different products is because we just decided to pilot something and saw if it worked. I think that's a great way to function in general. Speaking of your sustainable cities, I did read that a lot of the work that you do is designing cities so that anyone living in that city automatically has a reduced carbon footprint. And I find that really fascinating, because at times we talk about cut what you can, neutralize what you can't. So we encourage consumers, brands, everybody to take as many actions as they can to reduce their carbon emissions, like maybe taking up an electric car or solar panels, or maybe even something as simple as switching to vegetarianism. And then whatever residual emissions that are remaining, which there always will be, you neutralize them through platforms like Climbs. So would love to hear more about how you design for a city that automatically lowers someone's carbon footprint.
See, I think it's a topic of conversation that we've been having in the last 5-6 years, even before the climate agenda sort of took the center stage. We're talking about 10 years ago when climate was a fringe conversation. We were talking about cities, how they could be resource efficient at the end of the day. But it finally boils down to the fact that all of these are lifestyle choices, and the city can do what it can do to facilitate some of these lifestyle choices. So when you talk about public transportation, right? So your biggest emitters are basically energy and transportation put together. That is your 75% of GHG accounting, which happens for any city for that matter, to be particularly Indian cities. So if you're able to ensure that you're able to save energy, for example, embed passive cooling and passive heating solutions, depending on where and which part of India you are. If you're able to design and consider those passive design techniques to ensure your cooling and your heating loads are reduced, you save a pig on that. And of course, there are technological solutions as well. But indigenously, we are from that part of the world where you could consider a lot of these traditional building knowledge. If that could be really imbibed, you could think about how you could reduce your footprint by 50% or so. Of course, public transportation has been a conversation for ages altogether.
Yeah.
But I think it's a work in progress because we are expected to do multiple things. We are at the same time talking about affordability. We are talking about electrification. We want to think about how do you deal with the batteries later on once it's being used. So we are in a very interesting space right now to see how do we come out of it. And I'm sure that India is going to be the stage for this, the biggest transition that we're trying to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's no one silver bullet answer to the question, but we're trying to see what city the city basically has on its own, and how you could leverage that to talk about different solutions.
Like mangroves in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to know. It's so good to know that this is happening in the country. And you're right. I totally agree that it's going to happen in India for sure. That's where we'll see the biggest transition. And like you said, even though you can design for something as well as you can, it's all about whether people adopt that behavior at the end of the day. And we also face that at Climbs as well. So the way we've designed the products is to try and integrate them into people's everyday lives as far as possible. So to reach them through the consumer brands they recognize, they take a flight, they can neutralize it. They order some clothes from a brand like Tamarind Chutney, they can neutralize it. So it's more about associating carbon emissions with the activities that they do, because we find, like earlier when we were talking directly to consumers, now we're a bit more B2B. But a lot of my job used to be trying to educate someone on the concept of carbon emissions, what it means, how to neutralize, etc., etc. And it's just too much to go down in too little time. People don't have enough attention span. So we found that just having the association of the carbon emission with each product is a way to just have that person recollect that, okay, everything I'm doing has a carbon footprint, and I can make decisions to reduce that and neutralize that. And that's in the similar way with companies. I think having carbon neutral events in your calendar is kind of the corporate way of integrating sustainability into your everyday practices. But I would love to hear from you how you, to what extent do you actually try and change that behavior in the work that you do, or even when you're working with, say, local people on the ground, what kind of techniques or what do you do to get their buy-in in what you're trying to execute?
This is one space I think we've been struggling for a long time right now, especially in terms of messaging or getting things right?
Yeah.
Because anything that's there to do with climate, we're talking about collective good. So the first question that you speak to an individual, it's like, what do I get out of it? In a better planet, all of that looks good on posters, but what do I get immediate returns on it? So this is a point of conversation almost for everywhere, even to the clients that we talk, or even with the local governments that we work with. You need to see something come up physically to really reassure them and see the benefits of it. Storytelling has worked out in some places for us, especially messaging in the language, and also linking up with the cultural systems that are sort of there. So this is basically called a manjapai. It's a cloth bag. So they did this as an alternative to plastic ban in the state. Okay. So manjapai basically means manjai in Tamil means yellow. So traditionally it used to be that they used to apply turmeric to the cloth bags and they used to take it and go, so that it used to offer as a pesticide or as a thing to really ensure that you're not getting affected by any other insects or anything that you carry. Okay. So this is very much registered in the population that we deal with, right? So we bought this campaign called Meendum Manjapai, bring back the Manjapais. That's what it literally translates in English. So that messaging has worked with the communities. So they take these bags and we put up ATM machines, just like how you have ATM machines. So these vending machines were put up for the same in front of the flower markets and the other places as an alternative.
Yeah.
And then you push it up with brand ambassadors and other things. You work along with them to see that, this is the traditional one. You also have the tote bags and
Yeah.
the different types of bags, and you mix the fusion of fashion vis-a-vis culture, and then also the messaging behind it. So, yeah, I think we're just trying out some of these interventions to see how people can do that. Otherwise, it's a very difficult task. Even some of these hard discussions, they happen. For example, you said turning vegetarian might be easy. Try telling that to a non-vegetarian guy; he's not going to believe it. Right? So unless or until it's enforced, or he sees little benefits from it. But I think in some places where we are able to really enforce this, or put it together, where there is complete flexibility for us to organize those events, we are able to do that. In other places, we think about other ways to see how you could reduce it, and so that it works out. Because change can happen over a period of time. You cannot really enforce and start asking people to just follow it in a strict manner or so. So yeah.
No, fully agree that this is fascinating for me, because that's like textbook anthropology, in how you learned from the culture that already existed and then adjusted your campaigns accordingly. So do you actually, out of curiosity, have anthropologists on your team that are working on this?
Yeah, we do. I think we're blessed with a completely interdisciplinary team who come from different walks of life, and have done not just design-based studies, but also people who work with communities at the grassroots levels, and especially in terms of storytelling and messaging, because it's a very complex topic. In literal translations, there's no word for climate resilience in Tamil. So how do you if there is no word to define it, how do you really communicate that this is a matter of concern? And they're coupled with other factors, right? Climate is not an immediate concern to them. They are faced with poverty. There are issues in terms of the economic loss that they have sort of been incurred as a result of the pandemic. So when you have all of these, how do you still make them prioritize this? So they need to see benefits. You need to think about the advantages, and they need to be shown what would they get as a result if they start investing or trying to support them in that. And that's why we work a lot on the climate finance space, where we support them in this seeding of different initiatives and piloting of them. So, for example, we support them in getting, let's say, this drought-tolerant varieties of seeds. So the benefits, they get to see it, and so the free promotion of that. So it's basically trial and error of most of these things.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly with carbon emissions, for example, when we're trying to explain to someone the negative effects or negative impact of carbon emissions, it's very hard to convey that because they're invisible. Whereas a company that has waste, you can show the waste and people can say, okay, we remove the waste, so you see an actual impact of what you're doing. But with carbon emissions, like you said, it's very difficult to try and communicate that impact. And we've tried to do that through gamification, through rewarding, through making people see the impact by directly connecting them to the projects that they are contributing to, having transparency and trackability on their money, where it's going. But like you said, it's a learning process. I think we're still to figure out what will really get the message across in the best way possible. And it's different for different people. So definitely a work in progress. But this is interesting for me because a few years ago, I was looking at the climate space from a development lens. Now I look at it differently through climes. And at least in my university, I found a kind of reluctance in certain departments to combine development work with capitalist business models. It was very much like, this is what we do and that's what you do, and that's never going to combine. And I feel like maybe now that's starting to change. In my mind, Climbs is an example of that change. But how do you see, have you noticed that change, or like, how do you see organizations and companies like that working together going forward?
I think we are getting to the place, to be quite honest, from greenwashing to people really taking into account for what of these interventions could really mean to them. ESG reporting has been something that people have been doing for so long. But being in that sector myself, I've not really seen people using that data to really inform their own decision making. So if you don't really, the data is out there, but if you don't really interpret that and try to bring that into your own practices, you're not going to reap the benefits of that in any ways. And half of it was also because there was not much amount of regulations and regulatory support that was available. But I think in the last 3 years, it is gained a larger momentum in the way how carbon markets are going to really function out in India. India is going to come up with its own indigenous market in a couple of months or so. There's going to be a big announcement on that and see how that could be facilitated. Otherwise, I think it's mostly about demystifying the space because if you just go out, read out the IPCC's document, right? It's very difficult for somebody to interpret that document. There's so much jargonized words out there that it becomes very difficult for anybody to really interpret. And so many references to make, right? When you look at even FSC and the host of conventions, the amount of COPs that it has basically taken to even, in a way, I think, to come to a consensus of what somebody is supposed to pay, what somebody is going to function. There's a lot of lull over it, and there's no much clarity. I think the success of carbon markets or the way how these different services, for example, what Climes is also trying to do is in terms of the neutralization space. It's wholly dependent on the way, the clarity, the transparency in the projects. For example, as a person that I'm interested in investing some of these projects, we very much interested to see the kind of growth that has happened as a result, and also move beyond. In today's world, we just stick with certificates and tokens and stuff. But what I would be really interested is to see through a dashboard if there is a physical progress in terms of the coverage of the area, or has it contributed in any other sense per se. I think there is going to be a lot of movement in this account in the futures.
Even we noticed that people needed to see a physical change for them to realize that something had happened. So we use satellite imagery to show like progress updates on the places that people are investing in, for sure. So WRI, I would say, given this event that you did, this carbon neutral event, you guys have clearly shown, you walked the talk on your climate action. It's in the work that you do, but it's within your organization itself. And that's really amazing to see. And I think that really sets an example for all other similar organizations about what it's really going to take to drive change. Even businesses, like you said, they're measuring ESG, but what are they doing with it that's actually making a change? So based on that, what plans do you see for WRI to create more impact? Like, what's next for you guys?
So I think what this event has basically given is a small example of how this could be done. And it created a lot of curiosity among different practices. And the way how we are organized in WRI is that we have different programs and verticals based on the domain that you contribute. There is a cities program, there is a climate program, and within the climate program, there are other futures as well. There is energy program. So what this has given is a bit of curiosity in how those programs also want to, because they do workshops as well. And they want to start thinking about how they could even account for these changes as well. And start looking this as more of a programmatic way of including this in part of all the workshops that we do. So there are different insights that we're getting, and I think we are in the initial stages now. So we're compiling and putting things together as a report, both to our donors and our even partners and our collaborators, to see how this could be done, and if we could come out with such a policy in the near future, because we have a host of different policies, from our offices, from our zero waste policy to in terms of the movements of the travel policy that we have in terms of accounting for carbon emissions and so on. We're trying to see if we can come up with a workshop policy itself, which will help us to see how we go about even our workshops and include this as a part of it as well.
That would be incredible. It's such a good example of cross-pollination across the board. And like you said, it's exactly what Climb is trying to do. We're trying to connect various different stakeholders through the instrument that is the Climb, because the solutions exist, the people who want to take climate action exist, but there's no easy way to connect the two. And in this Gen Z ecosystem that we keep talking about, one question we always like to ask our podcast guests is, if in this, there are various stakeholders, there's individuals, there's brands, enterprises, and organizations like WRI. Who do you see as the main actors that will lead sustainable change? Will it come from individuals? Will it come from brands? Will it come from organizations like you?
I think all of us have to play an equal role to it in one way or the other, because one has to act as a catalyst for making the change. But at the bottom line, it's all about how individuals want to do, because your enterprises and your brand owners, they respond to the market at the end of the day. So if as a generation, we have a lot of sensitivity in the way how we go about purchasing, or we go about our own lifestyle choices, your market is completely going to respond to it.
Exactly.
Just a small snapshot of it was the green building scenario in India. We started in somewhere in 2000. Hardly there was any sort of an uptake. Now today, I think there is an expectation from these different multinational corporations, for example, Infosys or any other brands. They are talking about how they would require 50% of renewable energy consumption in their day-to-day usage. So this whole idea of green buildings and other things come from market-driven. Right? So it's about how you can show them the benefits of going into these different spaces. And at the end of the day, if they are able to imbibe it, the market is also going to change in the way how people are responding.
I actually fully agree. I've often given the example of veganism because it was quite a fringe idea. And then the more people demanded it, now almost every restaurant has vegan options. The same way we have to do that with climate change. So it does start with the individual, for sure. But how would you describe the role of an organization like WRI in the climate space?
So we are all about catalyzing the actions that are necessary, and there's no one particular way that we define ourselves in terms of promoting this action. But the idea is to see how do you bridge the intent behind it. So a lot of our work is mostly on the policy action space, and the major work that we are trying to bring into is in terms of the behavioral insights of the indigenous and the marginalized communities. Because all the conversations that we are trying to have in terms of the global carbon outlook and other things, the impacts are felt at the local level. So factoring their voices, factoring their own methods, and how do you ensure that they have sort of a voice that gets factored into the policy at the end of the day. So this whole mainstreaming business is what we try to do. And as a change manager, we're all about collaboration and speaking to people to get this up.
Yeah, I think that is the most important thing, because there are loads of innovations, technology that exists, but how to get that across to the people that actually need it most, that's where an organization like you would come in. We've already got not much time left, so I'll ask my concluding questions. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface though, so you have to come back. But what do you think, what would you say is the single most exciting project in the climate space right now for you?
I think, are you talking about the national level? I mean, is there any specific...
we can say national in India.
So for me, I think the only way that India is going to go meet its own targets in terms of being carbon neutral by 2070 is if it looks into its energy demand and the way how we go about decarbonizing the way our energy sector basically looks like. Because as a country, I think we are heavily dependent on coal and thermal power plants. But interestingly, I think there's a lot of change that has happened in terms of the way how we look at our energy mix. So the renewable energy space is getting interesting day by day. And very recently, I think a couple of days ago, the Prime Minister sort of rolled out the National Hydrogen Mission, the Green Hydrogen Mission, which I think will have a lot of buy-in in the days to come, in the way how industries are going to use this as a medium source of energy to go ahead with. And WRI is sort of proud to be partnered with this with the ministry to support in the rollout of this particular mission per se as well. So that's going to be an interesting space that we'll probably look at.
No, that's amazing. And definitely, there's a lot of exciting things happening in India in general. And looking to the future, there's definitely a green shift that is happening here, which I think started in other parts of the world, but very much is now here in this country. So I also feel very proud to be a part of that with Climbs. So thank you so much for being on this podcast. It was a really, really interesting conversation for me in particular, especially given what I was wanting to do and what I'm doing now. And I actually see a lot of synergies in the work that we're doing. So for me, it was a very rewarding conversation, and thank you.
Same here, Saba. Thanks for hosting me as well.
Yeah, hope you come back soon so we can chat more.
Sure.